The following podcast contains explicit language and spoilers for the film Donnie Brasco. Hello and welcome back to DVD Clutter, the podcast where we look over our DVD selection and decide what stays and what goes. This week we're screening an old film from the 90s. It's weird calling that an old film, I think. But the film is Donnie Brasco.
When Lefty brought Donnie into his world,
Who's this guy? This is Donnie, a friend of mine.
he took a risk on a kid he hardly knew.
I'm gonna have to school you, my friend.
School me in what?
Wise guy never carries his money in a wallet. See? Always in a roll.
This is my first time watching it. I'm joined, as always, by my lovely spouse, Heather.
Hi.
And I guess I'll start it off with what's your relation to Donnie Brasco? What's it about, and what does it mean to you?
So this is not a movie that I grew up watching. I actually first watched this movie because Netflix recommended it to me back when they were sending DVDs in the mail. So, I tend to watch a lot of gangster movies. So Netflix was like, you might like this one. And I gave it a go. It's a movie about an FBI agent named Joseph Pistone who is working undercover in the mafia in Brooklyn, and his name is Donnie Brasco. That's his undercover name. And in the film, he's played by Johnny Depp, and he befriends Al Pacino, who plays Lefty Ruggiero, I believe is his last name. And it's basically his relationship with Lefty and their friendship that they form, and kind of how he betrays him in the film, and, just kind of that relationship. It's a movie that I think is kind of not talked about as much when we're talking about a lot of those gangster movies, especially the 90s. Of course, we're always going to talk about Goodfellas, but I think this one really holds up, and I think there's a lot to that we can really say about it. How it came to our DVD collection is that I have been looking for a copy for years, specifically to show you. And we were at a flea market one day and they had a copy for $1 or something. So I was like, well, we definitely need to pick it up and add
I
it to the
completely
collection.
forgot about that.
Yeah,
Well,
that's how we actually found it.
We finally watched the DVD that
We
you
did.
bought to show me.
Yes.
So you said that it holds up. What do you think are the points that really sort of stand out for you? We always come back to the question of, like, where's the heart of the film? What's the heart of Donnie Brasco?
I think it's Al Pacino's character and his performance in this movie. He is giving a really fantastic performance that's actually pretty restrained for what he was doing in the, in the 90s. We tend to think of Pacino, some of his greatest performances, as Michael Corleone in The Godfather, or, debatable, but Scarface is another one. When he's in these gangster movie roles, he's typically the top dog. And in this one, he's been in the business for 30 years. And he describes himself to Donnie as, I'm just a spoke in the wheel and so are you. And I think that kind of sums up the vibe of a lot of the movie, which is just the daily ins and outs of this guy who's been in this business for 30 years trying to make it. He doesn't have a lot of money. He owes the big boss a ton of money. He's so endearingly always trying to throw Donnie some extra, some extra bucks, and then taking it back, just being like, if you could just spot me. And, he takes back the money he gives him.
That was an early scene in the film where he gives him an envelope full of money as Donnie pays him off, pays him his tribute.
Yeah.
And then on his way out the door, he's like, hey, can I borrow a couple $100 and takes back all of the money that he gave him in the envelope.
Yeah. The kind of riches and extravagant lifestyles that you see in some of these other gangster movies, it's not here for his character. Lefty's not living that kind of life. He's just getting by, He doesn't have a fancy house. He doesn't have a fancy car. He's just kind of like you said, he's just a spoke in the wheel. He's just trying to survive. He's trying to not piss anybody off.
But he initially presents himself to Donnie and to a lot of the people around him as if he's like on the cusp of like taking over the whole, of taking over, maybe not being the big boss, but being like what is they call him Skipper.
Yeah, Skipper.
He's like upset because Michael Madsen passes over him.
Right.
And speaking of Michael Madsen, it was interesting kind of watching this film in relation to our conversation in the last episode about Reservoir Dogs. I felt like there was a lot of DNA down to opening up on a group of criminals having a conversation about, like, what is the best kind of luxury car? Is it a Lincoln or is it a Cadillac?
Yeah.
It's a better automobile.
Forget about it. Cadillac got more acceleration. It's got more power. It's got better handling. It's got what? It's got more leg room for your legs. It's got more power.
You just said that. Bingo.
What is it?
You just said that. More power. Start to repeat yourself.
How do you feel about this movie after watching Reservoir Dogs?
It's interesting because I felt like, we talk about the heart, and I felt like there is a lot more heart. There is a lot more curiosity. There's a lot more sincerity. There's a real interest in getting all of the details right and really sort of understanding the world that these folks are living in. And I think that's really the function of having, Pistone playing Donnie Brasco, is that he comes in and Pacino takes him under his wing and is giving him the tour and letting him know, all of the rules and things like that. I did feel like visually it was lacking. I really wish there was some more of the panache, I guess, what you would see in a film by Tarantino or by Scorsese. There's not a lot of flash here. It's a lot of shot like just sort of standard coverage of people having conversations. The conversations are really good. I think the screenplay is really strong. Maybe a little bit long. We did watch the extended cut. Between this and Bad Santa, we seem to be doing a lot of extended editions. This was like a thing back in the day with DVDs where they would release the movie and then they'd release like the special edition, which had all of the stuff that slowed the movie down.
Right. I don't feel that the length is really a problem for me. I actually think it moves pretty quickly, and from what I've read, a lot of the stuff that is in the extended cut is a lot to do with Joe and his family life. That's a lot of the stuff that was cut from the original theatrical run. There's the scene of him like vacuuming and cleaning his car and trying to like do domestic life while also balancing out the fact that he's, infiltrated the mafia and
and is rising beyond the people who brought him in.
Right,
even.
exactly. And, I think that it does add something to the movie. I think that there's also a scene of Donnie, I'm confusing him, Donnie and Joe, because he. So yeah, exactly. Joe and his wife towards the end of the film, where they have a conversation in the garage, where she gives him the $300,000 bag of money that he hid in their house, in their attic. And, I think that's a really good scene. I think that it gives closure to the journey that they've been going through and their relationship dealing with this.
What did you think about the domestic scenes?
I thought they were okay. I think Anne Heche was not maybe my favorite pick for the actress. I think that she sort of just really gave kind of a ho-hum performance in my estimation.
I kind of feel like the issue with those scenes is not really Anne Heche's performance, it's the character. It's that she's there as an obstacle that he has to overcome. And you see this a lot in a lot of films. I kept sort of keeping an ear out to whether it ever passes the Bechdel test. She's basically like the only character, like female character in the film who really kind of has any sort of presence, and every conversation that she has in the film is about her husband.
That's true.
And I felt like I really don't like characters like that because she doesn't get to have a moment that's her own in the same way.
Yeah, and I do agree with that, because I have seen her in other films, and I think that she was a very talented actress, and I think in this one she's just not really given a lot outside of, I'm going to nag my husband because he's not home, and I'm going to keep saying the same two things every time he does come home.
And I think she does it very well. She doesn't play it like a nag. She plays it as someone who understands and, starts off kind of passive aggressive about it, but
Right.
over the years that this is taking place, just escalates and escalates.
And I think it's just their inability to communicate the expectations and things with each other, because she says, this started out as a 6-month thing or a 3-month thing, and it, is ballooned into 2 years and then beyond that over
And
the
it was
course
2
of
years
the film.
at the beginning of the film.
Right. And they just seem to sort of, Joe can't really communicate to her what this job means to him, to finish out this job, and what it means, to see this through, and his developing relationship with Lefty, and kind of how he feels a little bit responsible for Lefty's safety. He can't really communicate that to her because he can't tell her what he's actually doing.
Absolutely.
And so, I think that there's just that lack of communication between them. They just can't really understand each other because she can't get the full picture of what he's doing.
I thought it was interesting, as I'm watching this, I'm like, why would a married man take this gig?
Mm-hmm.
Why would he volunteer or let himself be volunteered for something like this? And I get it in the sense that I think that the movie does a good job of like presenting the FBI as a very incompetent organization, that there's a scene where he gets an envelope saying that he's being audited by the IRS and the FBI can't resolve that.
Right.
And then I was a little confused because at the end it seemed like the FBI agents sort of were setting him up to be whacked by Michael Madsen. But I think I might have misinterpreted that. I think maybe they were just telling him that, that we got our information. Donnie was working for us the whole time. But there seemed to be like an open offer, like, we can tell you where he is and you can kill him.
I don't know if it was that or if it was just kind of them, the FBI sort of letting them know, like, you're kind of planting those seeds of doubt where, they think they're so smart. They think they can trust these guys. And it's basically like, you can't trust anyone here.
Yeah.
And really the only person who truly believes it is Lefty. Lefty is like,
and he can't say that he believes it because he's on the hook for that.
Yeah. And, I think that that's sort of the thing that the FBI is going in to do there. I don't necessarily think it's like an open invitation to go whack Joe. I think it's more of just, haha, we got one over on you guys. So another thing I wanted to talk about was the fact that in real life, unlike in the film, Lefty did not get whacked by his boss, by Sonny Black.
The film is left a little bit ambiguous about that, but not very. It's strongly implied.
Yeah, he actually just went to prison, and he never said that, he never made a comment on Donnie Brasco, aka Joe, or Joe, aka Donnie Brasco, rather. And he just lived his life for 15 years. He was in prison, then he died of cancer. So the movie does give I think it kind of really does a good job with the way that it left it ambiguous, because you really do follow that journey and you really feel for him at the end. Like, wow, this guy has, not that I should feel bad for this guy who's been in the mafia for 30 years, but.
I mean, they make clear that this guy has buried a lot of bodies and killed a lot of people. And we see some of that in the film.
Yeah. But at the same time, towards the end, he puts the keys for his car and, in a place where his wife can find him, because that's a thing that
I thought that was a nice touch.
Yeah, and he's just kind of leaving his like stuff out for his wife to find, because he knows like this is going to be this, I'm probably going to get whacked. And I think it's just I think it's a good ending for his character, even though it's a sad one. I think that it's kind of, I think he knows that this is the life. This is the life, and it's always a possibility. Some guys make it and a lot of guys don't.
What did you think of Johnny Depp's performance and the character of Joe Pistone, a.k.a. Donnie Brasco?
I really liked his performance here. In the 90s, Johnny Depp, for me, is really just the peak, I think, of his acting career. And I think, this is towards the later 90s. I think this was 97 when this came out. But I really liked his performance. I thought that he did a good job of... In the beginning, you have some scenes where you can maybe still see there's a little bit of Joe there, but then he's really blurring the lines between, him really just living this Donnie Brasco character 24/7.
I felt like the character was kind of a blank slate for me a little bit, and I felt like not that Depp was doing anything wrong in the performance. Certainly, 90s Johnny Depp was incredible eye candy. Like another one with a big fall from grace for me. But we're considering the films here, and I want to acknowledge that. But I also don't want to get hung up on it because
Sure.
I'm not really capable to speak of it at length. But I thought that he was good, but also that I felt like the character was a little bit like, I didn't think that there was a lot of juice to the character. You know, like I felt like for the most part, he's there kind of a blank slate. You sort of empathize with his position, and then as things got worse and worse, I thought it was interesting to see sort of how he's navigating the ways that his decisions affect innocent people. He's trying to protect Lefty, or we find out that that's really his motivation for staying on as long as he does. He's trying to protect Lefty, but also he's getting people injured to not blow his cover. He's getting, by the end, he's basically given the choice of kill somebody or be killed because you're the rat.
Right. Yeah, and I can see that. I think that, could I see other actors in the role? Yeah, probably. I think that him and Pacino, though, play really well off each other, especially during some of the more comedic scenes. There's that scene where they're in the hotel room and Pacino is just wrapped in the blanket. He's freezing because someone was messing with his thermostat, and it's just really funny to me. I just think they just play off each other so great in that scene.
Pacino's great in this movie, and I'm not generally a huge fan of big Pacino, which like 90s Pacino. Early in his career, you know, he was Michael Corleone. He was very like squirrely, he had like a much more nasally voice, and then somewhere around Scarface he got very gruff.
Yeah.
And this is definitely gruff Pacino, but he doesn't overplay it.
He doesn't. And I think this is really one of his best performances, especially for his later career. It's kind of reminds me of a little bit more of like what he did in The Irishman or like a movie like that. He's doing his Al Pacino gangster thing, but it's not Carlito's Way, which,
which we just watched last week.
Yeah. It's not Scarface. He does feel like he's genuinely having a good time in the role. And there is actually a lot of funny moments for him. And there's he's got some really good lines. I think that it's just a really well cast role for him.
Agreed.
And back to Johnny Depp for a second, though, I think that especially in some of the really tense scenes, for example, the one where they go to the Japanese restaurant and he almost has to take his shoes off and he's got the recorder in his boot, moments like that where he's just, it's a little bit tense and you're like, what's going to happen? They're going to is he going to be found out right now?
It's funny because I knew I've seen enough movies like this. I missed the detail that he put the recorder in his shoe. I thought he was putting it in his leather jacket pocket.
Oh, okay.
So I was a little bit like, what's in his shoe? Yeah. Like, is there like a note? Did I blink and miss an important detail?
Yeah.
So I had to ask you. And it's a good thing we weren't in a movie theater because we would have been that annoying couple behind you.
Right, that's true. That was a great scene. And then the other one where they're in the airport and the FBI agent comes up to him. He's like, "Hey, Joe." And he's just like, he just starts wailing on the guy to shut him up.
Punches him right in the face.
Like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, you can't blow my cover. So, I think he does have some really good moments. And I think ultimately he's well cast in the movie. Yeah.
How did you feel about again, like that scene where he punches the guy in the face for calling him by his real name? When the gangsters around him are like, "What happened?" He's like, "They tried to touch my cock."
Yeah.
Is it like we were talking in the last episode a lot about how, there's like undercurrent of homophobia, racism, and a lot of stuff in a lot of these gangster films. How did that play for you in this film versus a film like Reservoir Dogs?
It didn't bother me as much in this movie, but it's certainly still there. There's, another scene where Pacino calls Donnie a cocksucker, and he's like, "Don't call me a cocksucker." Like they're going back and forth, and it's that was something I thought about.
He calls him a motherfucker as well.
Right, and that was something I did actually think about during that. But you know, it doesn't bother me as much in this kind of movie because, like, I don't know, maybe it's just that I've known too many straight men, and that's kind of how too many straight Italian men, and that's kind of how they joke with each other. Not that it's acceptable or funny, but
I think it works here because it's shown as a weakness of the culture.
Yeah.
It's a vulnerability point for them where it's like, okay, you want to direct attention away from that, you know,
Right.
turn it to homophobia.
Yeah.
And it blinds them to something that was actually a really important clue for them to discover him. You know,
Yeah.
I think that there's and it does feel more like it's like the lived reality, and it's not overplayed. It's not brought into scenes where it's not relevant, I would say. Or at least it says more about the way that the characters relate to one another rather than just like throwing it in there.
Yeah, and I think that in this movie there is more emotional vulnerability and depth to the characters. You have a lot of scenes where Pacino is talking about his dream of just getting a boat and just, you know, taking his wife and just sailing away. There's another scene where he's like, tomorrow's Mother's Day, you're not going to see me because wise guys don't work on Mother's Day. You know, it's like all of these sort of
That was such a great scene too, because it like, again, it's like last episode we were talking about how, you know, in a Tarantino film the main characters can never be made to look uncool. And he's like they're in this like petty little fight. He's yelling out the hotel balcony, and then he goes to get back into the hotel and realizes he locked himself out.
Yeah.
And he was previously refusing to call the maintenance guy because what if the maintenance guy is a cop? Like again, it gets back to the idea that like there's something pathetic about these guys. There, you know, this is not a, like you were saying, it's not glitz and glamour. It's not, you know, they are all seeking this power fantasy, but none of them ever actually achieve it.
Yeah. And I think something to going back to what you said about how this movie stylistically doesn't, you know, visually doesn't really do it for you. And I can understand that. At the same time, I think that this is more in line with something like The Sopranos, or like where, you know, these guys are just living their life. And like you said, there is a lot of a lot of patheticness, and there is a lot of them never being able to live up to this idea of what, you know, the boss is, or what what they think they're going to be when they're a made guy.
But I think the Sopranos also is an example where it's never visually boring in the way that I felt like, you know, because I was thinking about this where it's like it's kind of it may be by design that it's a little bit more visually mundane, that it's more true to life because the characters don't have the glitz and glamour. They have no reason to romanticize the lifestyle. They're hanging out in these like very run down dive bars and, you know, doing a lot of times very like grunt work, like trying to open up a parking meter with a hammer that was stolen.
Yeah, this crew is not high up in the chain. And there's even the scene where the boss's son, Sonny Red, where he's like walking in, they're going to have this meeting, and you see Pacino, he's waiting almost like he's going to get an autograph from this guy. The way he's looking at him, it's almost like, oh, there's the boss's son. And it's like he hates him, but at the same time, he wants to sort of be him.
Yeah, you have to, because you have to pay that respect. You know, all of these folks, they're not finding freedom in this lifestyle. They're not presenting the illusion of freedom in this film.
Yeah. And I think, too, there's a lot of times where you could sort of see the difference between Donnie, and Lefty. A lot of these gangsters are so out of touch because Lefty's like, you can't wear jeans, you can't have a mustache, like you got it, these are just things you have to do. And it's like they are not with the times. They're still showing up to, you know, do this grunt work in their suits, and it is kind of pathetic because it's like we're walking around with this air of the you know, that we're doing something like honorable, you know, and it's just it's kind of silly.
That's another detail I did really like about the film, was the fact that so much of the fashion and stuff feels left over from prior eras. You know, so often you see a film that takes place in the late 70s, early 80s when this takes place. And, you know, all of the fashions are from late 70s, early 80s. But you and I grew up in late 80s, 90s, early 2000s. And, you know, we remember all the old wood paneling in houses. You know, we remember how brown everything was. You know, it wasn't all neon and like jazzercise.
Yeah, and Pacino's got that kind of hideous fur coat that looks like it's seen one too many seasons, you know, and it's probably something he bought in his heyday when he had money to buy it, you know, as a younger gangster. And, you know, now it's just kind of disheveled and gross looking. And I think that those elements really add to making it feel very lived in, very realistic.
One detail that didn't work out so much for me is early on in the film, I felt like Pacino is too invested in Johnny Depp too quickly.
Yeah.
That the film starts off and you know, Depp is pretty apparently spying on him. And then, you know, and he catches him and he's like, who's that guy? Oh, he's a jeweler. And he goes with the diamonds and he calls the diamonds. He has him check the one diamond that the guy paid him with, and the guy's like, that's a dud, that's Fugazi, or Fugaze, whatever. It's fairy dust, you know, and you know, immediately like takes him to go beat the guy up, and there's that whole sequence, and I'm like, he has no reason to trust what he's saying is true.
Yeah. I agree with you there. I know a lot of it was condensed just for, you know, the timeline of actual events was obviously condensed for the movie. So I'm not really sure how long he spent setting up this.
Well, and I'm not saying that as a, you know, as like a fact check. I'm saying that as like, you know, the character dynamics early on in the film, they feel like they're built on something more fragile.
Yeah, he does put his trust in Donnie, I think, a little bit too easily.
Especially since Donnie is kind of so uninformed about the lifestyle, like what his expectations are, you know, the fact that he has to be schooled so much, which makes sense from a screenwriting standpoint because we have to. Yeah. But it also kind of makes him look a bit incompetent trying to get into this organization.
Yeah. I think a way that they kind of can kind of be explained is that the relationship clearly between, you know, Lefty and Donnie is that of like father and son, because it's explained in the movie that, you know, Lefty's son is a drug addict and you see him, you know, overdose and you see them in the hospital. And I think that maybe to some extent Lefty sees Donnie as like, this is a
the son I never had.
It is. And it's, you know, I can teach him this stuff about my lifestyle. You know, I can pass this down to him in a way.
And you can also tell there's a power play element there where it's like, I like being the guy who can explain this to you.
Yeah. And I think he sees that, you know, Donnie is a clever kid, and I mean kid, he's probably in his 30s in this movie, but like, you know, but to Lefty he's the kid. And, you know, I think he sees that he's clever. He sees that he's, you know, he's not really afraid to be a little bit bold. Sometimes he does take some chances with the things that he says and does, and they often pay off, you know, in the movie. They pay off to his, you know, for him. And I think it certainly, you know, it moves him up in the ranks, the fact that he's kind of able to take chances. So I think Lefty does see that in him and sees something that he thinks, yeah, it's worth investing my time and energy into this kid.
Absolutely. What did you think of Michael Madsen? He's the guy that kind of leapfrogs Lefty in terms of running the organization, and then ends up, you know, kind of like really burdened by the expectations of having to pay the money up every month. Yeah.
I actually really liked that character, the Sonny Black, and also I thought Madsen's performance was really good in this movie. I thought that, again, that sort of seeing when he finally makes it to Skipper and then how much the job just sucks. Now he has to answer to the bigger boss. And, you know, now he's got to be responsible for all of these freaking idiot guys around him who, you know, they're getting money from parking meters and selling, like, scalping concert tickets. And he's like, there's no way we're going to make $50,000 a month, you know, to give to the big boss doing this shit. So I think, again, I like seeing those, like, the inner workings of this world and how kind of, like, shitty the job actually is, especially as you move up the ranks.
It's interesting because I agree with you. Like, I think that it's a much more, like, it's a much deeper, richer character. And yet there is something kind of iconic about his performance in Reservoir Dogs versus this one. And I don't really understand exactly how that works, but you know,
Yeah.
like maybe it's the mystery of it. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Obviously, I don't want to relitigate all of Reservoir Dogs, but the connections are certainly
Oh,
there.
sure. And honestly, as soon as I saw him come on, because I forgot he was in this movie, and I was like, oh, fucking Michael Madsen, because we had just watched Reservoir Dogs, and I disliked his character so intensely. But I was like, you know what? Just give it a chance. And I thought he did a really good job. I didn't even think that. I thought he didn't even do, like, he wasn't doing a caricature of
No.
like Italian gangster. He was just kind of doing his own thing, and I thought it really worked well.
Well, I think he's such a distinct on-screen presence.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah.
You know, he's the perfect character actor for a role like that because he
Yeah.
doesn't have to do anything aside from just show up and be himself.
Yeah. And I think that also goes to show in this movie that I don't feel like a lot of the characters were caricatures. Yes, they did have some of those elements of, you know, I want to say that I thinking specifically about like these 3 F words they keep saying, and I don't mean fuck. I mean fazool, which meant dollars in the movie. And then there was the fugazi, and there's forget about it.
It's like, if you agree with someone, forget about it. But then, if you disagree, like a Lincoln is better than a Cadillac, forget about it. But then, it's also like if something is the greatest thing in the world, like Mingiro's peppers, forget about it, you know?
You know, they have those elements in there, but it feels so lived in, and it really does feel genuine. And I find that kind of endearing about a lot of the performances and the characters in the movie.
Tim Blake Nelson and Paul Giamatti just showing up in random cameos as the people
Yeah.
like listening in on the wiretaps.
Yeah.
And they have a whole conversation with Johnny Depp about what's forget about it.
Yeah.
You know, and like they're so fascinated by this, and he's like I'm explaining how to have a conversation with a person in the Northeast to these idiots from Washington or Florida or wherever.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but Michael Madsen, good. I liked his performance in it. You know, I don't really have anything negative to say, honestly, about his performance or.
I guess one other connection that sort of occurred to me was, we've talked a lot about Tarantino. We've talked a lot about Scorsese and Goodfellas. I kept thinking about The Departed and how, you know, that kind of has like a similar sort of premise. I think that where that film kind of is ahead of Donnie Brasco for me is the fact that we really understand like what the psychology is of the undercover cop.
Sure.
They kind of set it up where it's like we're meeting Johnny Depp, we're meeting Donnie Brasco,
Yeah.
the way that Lefty is meeting Donnie Brasco, and we don't know right away that he's a cop. I think that what gets lost in that is that we don't necessarily have like a grounding of what all of this means to him throughout the film, to the point where when he says, if I pull myself out, Lefty gets killed, it's like, oh, now I look back on his behavior in the film and now it makes sense. But prior to that, I'm like, why are you keeping up with this? You're putting yourself in danger. You're putting other people in danger.
Yeah.
You know, you mentioned the Japanese restaurant where he gets the guy like severely beaten to a pulp.
Yeah. To what extent is it worth this information that you're getting? And I don't think the FBI really, at least in the scenes we saw, they don't really make it clear even what their expectations of him are. And, you know, sometimes it's almost like you didn't go far enough, or you need to go, you know, you went too far. So
Yeah.
I think he doesn't even know, what am I supposed to actually be getting out of this, like, you know, day to day.
You've got to vouch for our other guy who's
Yeah.
incompetent, and it's going to come back to you, which then comes back to Lefty, and other people are going to get killed, and they end up getting killed.
Right. And I think there's probably a very big disconnect between the guy who is the agent who's actually on the street undercover and the guys who are sitting in the office getting the information and are probably pissed at the rate in which the information's coming in and, you know, how things have to move. But, you know, Donnie's explaining, like, I have to live a certain way. There's like a code of conduct that I need to abide by. There's rules that I have to play by in order to get you what you want.
But getting back to The Departed, for example, and getting back to the idea that, like, we don't really get a lot about Joe's internal motivations, his like how he feels about what he's doing and how, you know, what it really all means to him. Is that something that holds it back at all for you, or not so much?
It doesn't really hold it back for me. I still enjoy it. I don't think upon rewatching it, I can definitely see some of the issues with the movie, and that's definitely one of them. You know, he kind of comes off as a real asshole every time he comes home because, again, he's just never explaining.
Cop.
Yeah, he's never explaining what does this job mean to him. And so, yeah, I think it does a good job of what it is. It's from the perspective of the undercover cop.
Yeah.
And I think that's what maybe is holding it back. But I think that the story with Lefty is so good for me, and that the Pacino performance is so good that I can kind of overlook the fact that, it's coming from the perspective of the agent,
So this is definitely a keep for you.
This is a keep for me. Yeah.
I'm kind of in the middle here. Like, I don't have a strong preference to get rid of it, but I also don't feel any urgency to keep it. I'm glad that I finally watched it. If you bought it for me to watch, I guess in that sense, well, it did its part, and
yes.
good work.
We watched it.
But it looks like it's staying in the collection then.
It can stay in the collection, I think, at least for now. Maybe one day, if I had to give up a movie to make space on that shelf, I might say I'd give it up. But for now, I'm good with keeping it.
That may be another thing. That may be another thing that we want to bring into this conversation is, as we consider getting rid of films, are there other films that might take their place in the collection? Yeah, we go, and what are the films worth keeping out to keep this one in?
Right. And that's definitely going to happen as our collection kind of changes and new movies come out and, take their place. And but for now, I think it can stay.
Awesome. So what is on the docket for the next episode?
Next episode, we are doing Let Me In, which is the remake of Let the Right One In. And I have seen that one, but I have not seen the remake. So I'm interested to watch it and see what I think.
I'm very excited to watch that with you and have this conversation. And we hope that the rest of you join us for that. So that's another episode of DVD Clutter.
Hey, Don.
Yeah.
Let's take a walk. I'm your best friend.